Hey, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to my podcast on this very special week, the week that I released my latest book, How to Recruit Clinical Trial Study Participants. It's on Kindle. It's $2.99. I've got a special promotion going on right now where if you buy the book, it's only $3, and you leave a review, positive or negative, I don't care. I just want reviews. I will send you something. It's either going to be a DVD of your choice, either the How to Get More Studies DVD, which I currently have priced at $39.99, or the Introduction to Clinical Research DVD, $39.99, or you can get a lifetime producer spot on the Clinical Trials Guru. I'm only accepting 100 producers, and I have right around 20 right now. So there's more room there. That's a $99 value, by the way, and it's a lifetime. So let me know. Just buy the book, review it, let me know you did it, and let me know what prize you'd like. And I'm also willing to barter prizes. So if you already have all three of those things, we can negotiate. Hit me up. But anyways, enough shameless self-promotion, although I do think the book is awesome. Let's get into the questions today, and as always, keep your questions coming. It's Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com, Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com. I'll keep you completely anonymous. So let's get into a couple questions this week. First one. Hi Dan, I'm a regular follower of your blog. Can you please discuss 3 topics that interest me? Number 1 is SMO strategies for good management, and for those of you who don't know, SMO is a site management organization. Number 2 is recruitment for acute diseases, and he gives the example flu. Number 3, what do I do with slow regulatory times in each country? So this person's from a different country. I'm not going to give it away. It's a Latin American country. That's about as much as I'll give away. So what do you do with slow regulatory timelines in each country? And I'll try to answer that, and then we'll get into a couple other viewer questions. So let's start with number 1, SMO strategies for good management. So what an SMO is a site management organization, and what SMOs do is they're usually a group of sites, research clinics, spread out across the country or across the world. They share the same SOPs, which are standard operating procedures. They often can get their studies, so when they get a study from a drug company, like let's say Pfizer, when they get a study from Pfizer, they can distribute this study to their various different sites with sponsor approval, of course. And lately, and by lately I mean the last 5-10 years or so, SMOs have kind of gotten a bad rap. There's been a lot of SMOs that have gone out of business. On the other hand, there have been a lot of SMOs that have been acquired and have kind of morphed into CROs, which are clinical research organizations. They're the ones who actually monitor the trials. I actually own a mini CRO, and what I'll do is I have various sites throughout the country. I'm working on global, but right now it's throughout the country. And when I get a study, I'll talk to a sponsor. For example, a certain sponsor may contact me and say, hey, I've got a study for this indication. Can you help me find some sites? I'll say, yeah, I'm actually affiliated with 20 some odd sites that of 15 of which I know could probably do a pretty decent job of this. At this point, the way I'm acting is not so much as an SMO, but rather a CRO. I even have monitors, CRAs, that I send out to audit these sites, to do routine monitoring visits at these clinics. I may share studies with them. We may share contracts. We don't share SOPs, although we can provide best practices and guidance, specifically when our CRAs go out. So that's a CRO. An SMO is a little different. It's a little more in-house. So they actually will negotiate the same budget across the board for all their sites. They don't have their own monitors necessarily, but they might have their own internal QA people, quality assurance people, that will go out and just do random audits on their clinics and on the studies. So some SMO strategies for good management. So let me start by saying the CROs. CROs are usually in charge of site selection, and it's their job. The drug company hires a CRO to choose sites and then to make sure that the sites are enrolling patients, make sure that the PIs are adhering to good clinical practice, make sure that data is being entered in a timely fashion, make sure the protocol is being followed, make sure that the safety of the subjects is being followed up on, make sure all the IRB approvals, which are the institutional review boards, all the IRB maintenance type of things are being conducted properly. And SMO actually has direct control over these things because they are, all the clinics are part of that SMO. They're one and the same. So they share everything. They're the same company, pretty much. And that differs from a CRO, which hires different sites to conduct their trials. So I run kind of a mini CRO, although I do have some advisory shares in the research clinics, but it's nothing in a formal matter, not in a formal capacity, although we do share SOPs, which are standard operating procedures, and best practices. So SMOs, my point in saying all of this is that SMOs really have the control to be able to manage from the site level all these different activities, whereas a CRO can only give recommendations. And if that site is not following them, they can discipline that site by either shutting down the screening capabilities, so not letting them screen anymore, or just taking the study away. And an SMO, but the CRO cannot control that site and say, hey, you did not complete this procedure as per protocol. We force you to do that. They cannot do that because that site is not part of the same company. An SMO can do that. An SMO can tell one of their sites, hey, make sure that you're following our internal procedures. And if not, I mean, that's the SMO's problem right there, and they have to answer directly to the sponsor as to why they're not following protocol. A CRO, if the CRO has a bad site that's not following protocol, the sponsor will tell the CRO, hey, shut this site down, but they won't necessarily hold the CRO responsible for not changing their actions because they can't actually do that. They can just stop their enrollment and remove the study. Hopefully you get it. Hopefully you can understand. Another big difference is that CROs negotiate a budget with the sponsor, and then they'll usually negotiate a separate budget with each site that they've selected. So they get, and it's a small margin business, it's about 10% difference between what they receive from the sponsor versus what they pay the research clinics. From my own anecdotal experience, this is what I've seen, 10% profit margins. They make up for it in volume, obviously, of all the studies that they conduct. SMOs, on the other hand, negotiate the one budget with the sponsor for all their sites, and all their sites use the same budget because it goes to the same company. SMO strategies for good management obviously starts from the top. Hire good people immediately. In fact, probably one of my next books that I'm going to write about is going to be focused on HR, human resources, because I think it's extremely undervalued and not talked about at all in this industry. It starts with finding good people, and that starts from the top, and I mean the top, the CEO level down. And if the CEO is not involved in HR, other than just giving lip service to, the usual canned statements of we care about our employees, if they're not living that and breathing that, eventually that company is going to have a problem with culture and with finding and keeping good people. So that's strategy number one, is finding good people and then developing a culture that will really help cultivate that kind of an environment where people are keeping each other accountable for their actions. Other employees are keeping their colleagues accountable for their actions, and they don't need to be managed all the time by someone else. Number two is have good quality assurance in place, have good QA in place. I learned this from an auditor the other day at one of my clinics. She told me, first thing she did was she asked me, let me see your SOPs. And your SOPs, look, you can have whatever you want in them, but if you're not following it, if some regulatory body sees that you have something written in your SOP, and it may not be a requirement, a federal requirement or a requirement of any regulatory entity to have a certain thing listed in your SOP, but if you have it and you're not following it, that auditor, especially the FDA, is going to have that as a finding. You're not following your own standard operating procedures. Therefore, they will assume, and probably correctly, how can you follow anything? How can we assure that you're following anything you're putting down if you're not following your own SOPs? How are you going to follow a protocol written by a sponsor? Or how are you going to follow regulations written by the FDA? So this is what an auditor told me. Another thing an auditor told me is have everything down to the last details. So somewhere in the SOP, you're going to have very detailed things. An example she used was equipment calibration. So every year, or sometimes twice a year, depending on, or sometimes every quarter, depending on how often you use your various medical equipment in your research clinic, you're going to have someone come out and calibrate the equipment. Well, now the FDA and sponsors are looking at how exactly, what specific protocol are you following to calibrate these equipments? Is there a document explaining how these equipments are being calibrated? So you've got to have, and if you're an SMO, this goes back to the question. If you're an SMO and you're worried about managing your company, how are you paying attention to details? Are people following your SOPs? If they're not, how are you doing to correct that? Are you doing training? Are you writing them up? Are you making sure that people understand and have been trained on your SOPs? So back to the question, what are some good strategies for SMOs to run their companies well? I would say it starts with having good people and cultivating that type of culture where everyone's accountable and everyone knows what they're doing and you have systems that you're following, and then making sure that you have QA in place that routinely checks whether you're running your studies in your company according to your own SOPs, and then the sponsor's SOPs based on each different protocol, and then the FDA SOPs, FDA regulatory laws, and IRB requirements as well. Second question was give some advice for recruitment in acute diseases, for example, the flu. And what I can say here is, I mean, in my book, I talk about this all the time. I wrote about this extensively in my book, and it applies to non-acute diseases as well. But acute diseases, I get because it's people who are currently sick. Like example, someone with the flu, they may not necessarily be on Facebook or on Twitter. They might be sick. A good freebie recruitment strategy here is to put your ad, work a deal with the local pharmacy in your area, and put an ad on the pharmacy bags saying, hey, such and such research clinic is conducting a study for the flu right now. You kind of have a captive audience because they're probably getting their medications in that bag, and they may notice that bag and say, all right, this might be something good to, this might be something worthwhile to check out, so I'll give a call. Another acute disease is something like oncology, where maybe you do use social media and internet advertising. Google AdWords is really good. And this actually ties into another viewer's question where they asked, have you had any success with Google Ads? I used it once, but not much success. My reply was surprisingly yes, especially when you compare the cost of a decent Google ad campaign of $100 a month versus newspaper, which is at least $400 a month in my area, or radio and TV, which cost even more. So I think Google AdWords is very underrated. Um, I also have a whole chapter on Google Ads in my book, How to Recruit Clinical Trial Study Participants. Look, these things are underrated. A typical newspaper ad campaign, like a small text ad of this size in a newspaper, can cost you $400 a month. A Google AdWord ad, I suggest doing one per study, and I suggest capping it off at $100 a month for each study. So if you have a flu study, $100 a month. If you have an oncology study, $100 a month. You may get 1, 2, 3, 4 leads a month, and that's perfectly acceptable for any study. As far as just advertising goes, you may not get any from a newspaper, and you're paying $400 a month. And then if you get into radio and TV ads, those could be brought into the thousands of dollars every month. And you may get a lot of volume, a lot of calls, a lot of people requesting information about the study, but find out that they don't qualify. With a Google ad, you can narrow it down specifically to just people searching for those keywords. Like if they have the flu, they're searching for flu on Google. Or if they have a certain type of cancer, they're searching for those keywords on Google. And you're already filtering down from the masses, a huge volume of people, like you would get from newspaper, radio, TV, to just that select, already pre-filtered lead that you'd get from Google Ads. So I think Google Ads is very underrated. I would suggest using that also for the acute diseases as well. And I know you're in a different country, but Google Ads would work there just as well. Obviously, the offline recruitments still work. Door knocking, going door to door at different physicians' offices, pharmacists, letting them know you've got a study, talking about support groups that you may have. Set up a support group in your clinic. I write about this in my book as well. Set up your own support group, go to a support group, and try to recruit that way. So there's a lot of offline strategies that work as well. And as far as your question about the slow regulatory times in each country, I don't know what to tell you. I haven't done any clinical trials outside of the US yet. I'm working on a few deals actually in Latin America, so I'll let you know shortly. But if someone else has any advice, I do know that the regulatory approval process could take much longer in other countries because they don't have everything streamlined like we do here in the United States. So I don't know what to tell you there, honestly, but hopefully someone else has some experience there and can answer your questions. As always, thank you very much for watching and sending in your questions. Stay tuned for next week's podcast, where I'll answer even more of your questions and get into different topics. And again, check out the book, How to Recruit Clinical Trial Study Participants. It's $2.99 on Kindle. Buy it and leave a review, good or bad. Let me know, and I'll hook you up with something. I want to give my Clinical Trial Guru producers a shout out. It's South Coast Clinical Trials, Sarah Elizabeth Siegler, Resolve Research Solutions, Accurate Clinical Trials, Earnhardt Clinical Trials, PTNR, Patrick Stone, Breakthrough Clinical Trials, Kulkarni Law Firm, Biopharm Systems, Zymewire, Mozio, St. Paul Medical Research Center, Investigator Research Group, Phlebotomy Services, Atria Clinical Research Management, Rheumatic Disease Clinical Research Center, and our very newest Clinical Trial Guru producer, thank you very much, is, and I'll find it now, Clinexus Research, LLC. in Etowah, Tennessee. Thank you very much, and send your questions to Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Dan at theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Thank you for watching, listening. Thank you for buying the book. Thank you for reviewing it. Thank you for supporting me. Until next time, take care.